So let's look at what we need to do decorative stitches with our machine. Some of us have electronic machines, and they have loads and loads of stitches. And very honestly, most of us use a straight stitch and maybe a zigzag and nothing beyond that. And you know, we have these great machines with all this potential. We need to unlock that. And so that's what I like to do with decorative stitches. So decorative stitches will work with either your walking foot, or remember the IDF, the integrated dual feed foot with that little slot on the back. There it is, there's that little slot. So we either need to use our dual feed or our regular walking foot for decorative stitches. And there are certain decorative stitches that actually work better with this integrated dual feed foot, and I'll show you those a little bit later in the lesson. It's also really important to have the correct stitch plate in your machine. If you look carefully at this stitch plate, you'll notice that there is a large open area here. This is a 9mm stitch plate. And a lot of us, when we're doing our free motion quilting or some straight line walking quilting, it's good to use a single hole needle plate. If you use a single hole needle plate with a decorative stitch, you have a broken needle. Ask me how I know that. I've forgotten to change from my single hole to this open 9mm stitch plate, and very first stitch, bam, broke my needle. So please remember to put in this nice open stitch plate, because we're going to be using stitches that are going to make use of that opening. Okay, so let's think potential. I like to play. And this is a really good example of hours and hours of stitch play. It doesn't look very pretty, and it's not, but I spend loads of time just punching stitch numbers and stitching. Because guys, if we don't do that, we don't know what the stitches on our machine will do. Some of us have kind of just barely computerized machines, and you know, they don't have hundreds of stitches, but they do have stitches that you can use for walking foot quilting. And I'm going to show you those. Let's just look at this Bernina, for example. Right now I'm on the straight stitch screen. And the straight stitch has just the regular straight stitch that I use for piecing, but it also has utility stitches. And utility stitches are things like blind hem stitches, the serpentine stitch that we all know is stitch number 4 that we use for that great wavy quilting that we did in our last class. And it has stitches that they're not traditionally thought of as quilting stitches. And, you know, when somebody says they're not traditionally thought of as a quilting stitch, I'm like, but could they work? And I've explored these utility stitches, and even if you don't have a high-end fancy machine, you are going to have those utility stitches. And I'm going to show you a quilt later that's quilted out with a blind hem stitch, believe it or not, and it creates an amazing texture, beautiful quilting. On this machine, sometimes, you know, this is a computer, and it's kind of scary to touch these buttons, but we just have to go for it because it's our machine and we need to make it work for us. So the decorative stitch symbol is right here. It's this little wavy symbol, and I'm just going to pop that, and look what pops up. Massive stitch potential. All these folders, and if I scroll just one, it takes me all the way down to the 1701. So I guess there's 6 folders on that, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 folders on that. Look at all, and all of those folders are filled with decorative stitch options. I'm going to tell you right now that not all of them are going to work for walking foot quilting. Some of them, for example, I can see right now in the 501, in the 500 series, those are satin stitches. So I would avoid satin stitches for walking foot quilting because they just take too much time and too much thread. They're beautiful, but they don't work for walking foot quilting. If I go into the 600s, I start to see all sorts of stitches with interesting shapes, interesting designs, and that's where this comes in. That's when I start punching a stitch number and starting to stitch it out. And I just stitch it out until I find something that looks like it will work for quilting. And because there are so many stitches on this machine, and I have an electronic machine at home that has lots of stitches, once I find a stitch that works, I want to remember it. And so I've created a stitch journal. I actually learned this from the Stupendous Stitching class that's on Craftsy. She's created a stitch Bible. Hers is a little different than mine, but I thought, what a great idea. And so I've applied that to walking foot quilting. So let's look at my stitch journal. So this is my stitch journal. I've got it on this ring and it hangs in my studio, so it's really easily accessible. There are directions in your class materials for how I made this. But essentially I just started with like 10 by 12 quilt sandwiches. This is an actual quilt sandwich with a back, batting, and a front so that I could stitch out these designs. And that really nasty thing I just showed you with all those stitches. So I would stitch out, and when I would find a stitch that worked, then I would come to my stitch journal and stitch out that stitch. So I didn't have to look at that really nasty thing to find the stitch I like. I can come in this really organized journal and look at this stitch. And if we look really carefully, you can see right here, there's a little label on this stitched out stitch. This is number 664. And so I know if I want to use this design on one of my quilts, all I have to do is go to that 600 folder and look for 664 and punch that stitch. But honestly, that's not enough information. And before I go to the second part of my stitch journal, I just want to show you the potential here. First of all, that's pretty thick, right, guys? There are, I think, 12 of these. And look at all these beautiful designs. And I mean, so seriously, look at that. Look at that I can do on a quilt. There are just hundreds and hundreds of designs here. I want to show you something else that I've done in this journal. So if you look really closely, you can see that this is all the 763 stitch. This is 763A. This is 763B. This is 763C. And this is 763D. So only one stitch, but 4 different options. And without stitching them out in my stitch journal, I wouldn't really know. And with my brain, I honestly wouldn't remember that there were 4 different options for that stitch. And so that's why I'm stitching out all the options that I figured out on that kind of nasty looking stitch out sheet. But look at the potential for all of these quilting stitches. So many quilts, so little time.